Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the 100 seasons 1 through 3. In this video, I will give my in-depth review of the first 3 seasons of the CW show, The 100. So I'll have to start by giving a spoiler warning for the first 3 seasons of The 100. If you haven't seen all 3 seasons, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. However, if you would like to watch a spoiler-free review of The 100, click the link in the description below for my quick review of The 100, which is spoiler-free. However, this video will contain spoilers. So I read that the show is meant to be pronounced The 100, but that's BS, because if that's the case, it should have been spelled out The 100. The numeral written is pronounced The 100. So I don't care what anyone says. That's what I call it. Anyways, although I do overall have a favorable opinion of this show, I do sort of have a love-hate relationship with the show, as sometimes it can be very exciting and fascinating to watch, and other times quite contrived and fake. But ultimately, I like the premise of there being an apocalypse on Earth, where some humans escape by fleeing to a space station, but after several centuries, the station is failing and can no longer support them, so they have to return to Earth's surface, but are still unsure of how safe it is, so they send their children instead. This is an interesting premise, and of course this pretty much only applies to season 1, as the next few seasons move beyond that. In many ways, this show reminds me of 24, because it's very fast moving and it depends a lot on keeping you in suspense and keeping the show exciting. However, it also inherits many of the problems that show has at times the show moves too fast, and so they throw in plot lines and story points that want to shock you and keep you in suspense in order to keep the show going, and are not always in keeping with the storylines and character development that has already been established on the show. And many times, just like 24, you get the feeling that the storyline is purposely being stretched out to keep the show going, so that at times the many plot points can come off as contrived. So many times when watching this, I go back and forth from loving it and thinking it's the best thing ever, and hating it and thinking it's absolutely awful. However, my biggest complaint about the show is that it never sticks with the character development and established characters. And many characters will act totally out of character or have their character dynamics unnaturally and instantly changed permanently in order to service the plot. So it is very much a plot-based show, and my favorite types of shows are those that can balance plot and character stories perfectly, and this show doesn't do a good job of that. But don't get me wrong, there are times where this show has long-term character arcs, like I think the one they did with characters like Jasper, Raven, and Murphy work out pretty well. But on the other hand, the drastic character changes they did with characters like Jaha, Kane, Finn, and Bellamy were not so believable, and I just couldn't buy them. And there are some specific examples where characters will do something that's so jarring because it doesn't seem like that is how they've been established to behave. But on the other hand, the show has a lot of awesome moments, and as I said, it takes advantage of its unique post-apocalyptic setting and established a very interesting and unique world with different factions that feel real and dynamic. And for the most part, the show does manage to remain engaging and is very effective in keeping you in suspense and dying to see what happens next. So I read somewhere that the show is loosely based on a series of novels, and if I were to guess, I would say it's very loosely based off those novels, as I personally found that sometimes the show set up perfectly for future storylines, while at other times it was all too obvious that they were just making shit up as they went along. And much of what happened didn't match with what came before, which actually made for some odd viewing. The foreshadowing, for example, the fact that there were people still alive at Mount Weather who were causing mayhem was set up quite nicely, as was when Jaha arrived at the City of Light, seems entirely inconsistent with what had previously been established. So I guess this all adds to the back and forth mishmash of good and bad qualities that the show is made up of. And I do have to mention that this is another show with a really awesome opening theme that's just really good. However, the thing is that when the showrunners were coming up with the title for the show, they didn't really do a good job, as they weren't really thinking ahead. I mean, I understand that most shows don't get a second season, so when many shows start, the producers are only thinking about season 1, but still, the thought should have occurred to them to come up with a title that wouldn't be rendered pointless if the show moved beyond season 1, as the title refers to the 100 teenage prisoners that were sent down to the ground. And don't give me that garbage about, it's called that because it's based off a novel. Shows that are based off of novels can change the title of the novels to suit the show, such as Game of Thrones, which is based off of a series of novels called A Song of Ice and Fire. But show's not called A Song of Ice and Fire, is it? It's called Game of Thrones. So this show should have known that this title, regardless of whether or not the freaking book had it, does not apply beyond season 1. Now, first off, all people within the 100 start dying off immediately. So by the time they got to the season 2, there were only like 50-some kids left alive. And then the Ark came to the ground, so they're all joined by everyone who was on the station. So it wasn't any longer just the 100. So that title just got more and more irrelevant with each season. So there is that. So now let me get more into the show by covering each season, starting with season 1. So as I said, season 1 had a nice start to it. It was an interesting premise with the teenage prisoners being sent to the ground as test subjects, and the explanation as to why they were teenage prisoners made sense, as adults who committed crimes were simply executed. And it's interesting to see the kind of society that would naturally evolve on a space station with such limited resources, although I still find it a bit difficult to believe that the station would think all life on Earth was wiped out and they were completely ignorant to the large societies of humans living on the planet, but whatever. So there were parts to this I really liked. However, the show would constantly remind me that the target audience were teenagers, and it did this a little too much with all the cheesy musical montages, and my God, when they got back to the ground and the first thing they did was the "We're back, bitches!" and then start dancing to this cheesy music and celebrating, I was like, oh my God. Look, I know they're teenagers, but I don't care. That is fucking stupid. I like the characters of Jasper and Monty. They were tech-savvy stoner buddies. Finn was a bit too much of the wild, rebellious kid cliche. Clark was too much of the hero cliche. And Bellamy was a bit too much of the bully cliche. And Octavia was a bit too much of the hot girl cliche. But I will say the characters got much better as the show went on and moved beyond their stereotypes. So that's good. But the character of Wells, Jaha's son, seemed entirely pointless and a waste of time, because it seems they were setting him up to be an important figure with a redemptive arc that would affect Clark, but no, they just kill him off after a few episodes. Yeah, sure, when that little girl killed him, it was shocking, but I don't think it was worth losing an important character like that over. It rendered the whole storyline a waste of time. So a lot of people have drawn parallels between the first season of this show and one of my all-time favorite shows, Lost. And I definitely felt a huge Lost vibe with the show, although I never felt this show got anywhere near as good. It also had too much of a prime-time teeny bopper feel to it, as well as a Hunger Games feel to it, but I did get the sense of Lost. With a bunch of people stranded on a strange place and learning to get along with another in order to survive, while several leaders were vying for power, and they soon discovered that they're not alone. But again, this connection sort of vanishes after season 1. So the general consensus in season 1 isn't that great, but the show gets better in later seasons, and I have to say I agree with that, as the show was a bit too simplistic in the power struggle between Bellamy and Clark. In fact, a lot of it did play out like a lesser version of Lost. However, some people did enjoy the first season because of the storyline with the Ark in space, which we lost in later seasons. I did think the storyline was the most interesting aspect of season 1, but I don't think it made it better better than the other seasons. As again, parts of it were really intense, but other parts didn't really work. I love the storyline where they got the woman from Battlestar Galactica to play Jaha's adversary that then tried to assassinate him, and when that didn't work, she stole the dropship, which blew up on the way to the ground, while at the same time severely crippling the station to the point where everyone was fucked. That was a very exciting storyline, as was their journey to the ground. But before that, it was kind of a dull storyline, especially the conflict between Abby and Kane. So here's the thing I talked about earlier with the show not being consistent with its characters. This problem does get worse in later seasons, but there are examples within season 1 itself of characters taking drastic 180s. The most notable one is with the character of Kane, who is a dastardly villain at the start of the season, who legitimately seemed like he wanted to kill Jaha and take his place, and kill Abby along the way for standing in his way, and who would have destroyed the community by being thick-headed and bloodthirsty. But by the end of the season, he was a huge Jaha supporter who didn't even want to be Chancellor anymore and was against Jaha killing himself, and he was all of a sudden someone who wanted to do the right thing. This change was not natural. It was sudden, it was poorly handled, and it got even worse in the following seasons, which I'll get into later. So one last thing about season 1 before I move on. The Grounder conflict was interesting and had a pretty exciting conclusion, but the Grounders were at times being incredibly unreasonable and seeming like they were just twirling their mustaches and looking for an excuse to kill people. You know, I like the effort the show made to make the Grounders seem reasonable, as with the negotiations between their leader and Clark, she gave her perspective that, it was Clark's people who started the war, which you could kind of see, but then they went too far with it, and the Grounders were being a bit too unreasonable, so I don't think they properly managed to pull this off. So my rating for season 1 out of 10 is a 6 good. There were things about the season I really liked that kept me interested, like the mutiny on the Ark and preparing for the final conflict with the Grounders, and Octavia forming a forbidden romance with one of the Grounders, but the Clark-Bellamy conflict felt like a cheap imitation of Lost, and the first part of the Ark storyline was handled very poorly, and the characters would change too drastically, but overall a good season. So next is season 2, which is where the show got even more exciting with the introduction of the forces from Mount Weather. I got to say, I totally did not see this coming because they mentioned Mount Weather in the first episode. I didn't think they'd actually be a community of people there, and I loved the way this played out. It had a sort of an ominous feel to it, as they were everyone there insisted that they were friends of the Sky People, and they held Clark and the 47 others from the 100 prisoner, but fed them the line of, "Oh, you can leave anytime you want, it's just a bad idea," while it was obvious some unknown hidden agenda lied simmering below the surface, and the interactions between Clark and Wallace were golden as he tried to convince her that they were friends, but she could tell that something was wrong. And the storyline with Kane and the others coming over and trying to make peace with the Grounders was awesome. I love the introduction of the Grounder character Alexa, the warrior princess. This is such a badass character, but I gotta say, I saw Fear the Walking Dead before I saw this show, so it was weird for me to see the same actress who played the frail, naive character of Alicia on that show play a badass warrior princess on this show. And it is said she left the show so she could do Fear the Walking Dead, and if that's the case, she made the wrong decision, as this is a better show, and more importantly, this character is so much better than her Fear the Walking Dead character. Alexa really stood out, and I loved her relationship with Clark. I found the Grounder reluctance here way more believable than it was in season 1. It seemed a bit more reasonable, and it created more of an interesting dynamic. I love how her second in command tried to frame Raven for an attempted murder in order to protect attacked Alexa, and she executed him when she discovered this, even though she knew he had her best interests at heart. I love that storyline, and I like how she and Clark knew an attack from Mountain Weather was coming, but chose not to warn anyone else in order to keep their tactical advantage. This was the first true burden of leadership Clark had to bear, and it was really interesting seeing Alexa being her teacher in this regard. And I love the relationship that they formed. It seemed believable and brought an interesting dynamic to the show. Mountain Weather remained interesting after Clark left as well, with Jasper taking the role of the one Wallace tried to manipulate, and he was easier to manipulate at first, but then eventually caught on that something was wrong. I love his relationship with Maya. I totally bought it, and I thought it added a nice dynamic to the show. Rather than have all the Mountain Weather people be mustache-twirling villains, it showed a rich variety in the community where not all of them had bad intentions, and this of course was explored even more when certain members of the community were asked to hide the 47 ARC survivors. It had a real, hiding Jews in the Holocaust feel to it, and showed not all agreed with this aggressive regime. And the whole struggle Jasper and Monty had to lead once they learned that they just wanted to kill them to steal their blood was really exciting. As was the internal conflict within Mountain Weather, how Wallace was against using the ARC survivors in such a way. He wanted to find a beneficial way to, return to the surface that would work for both of them, but it made sense to me that there'd be a more desperate and less level-headed faction that wouldn't want to wait, and it was interesting that it was led by his son. So overall, Season 2 did improve upon the show a lot. There was a lot more dynamic, better character stories, which led to more exciting suspense because you were more invested. But not all of it was perfect. So now let me get into what I didn't like about this season. And first and foremost is the drastic, inconsistent, and sudden changes of characters that got much worse this season. First of all, Kane. A drastic change got even worse this season, as not only is he not a tyrannical dictator anymore, he actually turned into the voice of reason and was willing to sacrifice himself just for the chance to make peace with the Grounders. And I'm sorry, but this is not at all how Kane was established at the beginning of Season 1. That Kane would have went in guns blazing and would have started a war that would have gotten everyone killed. Don't get me wrong, I actually like this Kane much better than Season 1 Kane, but it is not at all the same guy, and the character change was so fake. And then there's Finn. So Finn in Season 1 was more like the new Kane, wanting to make peace at all costs and willing to sacrifice himself to do so, whereas Finn in Season 2 massacred a bunch of innocent civilians. Now I know they try to come up with the excuse that he thinks the Grounders have killed Clark and he's in love with her, but I'm sorry, I do not buy for a single goddamn second he hasn't been established as being so crazy in love with her that he'd be willing to throw out all of his principles. And it was far too drastic of a change to give, from a man willing to sacrifice himself to make peace to a man who refused to see the plain truth that the Grounders had nothing to do with Clark's disappearance, even when it was staring him right in the face. Someone who holds a grudge, he was deceived by someone who holds a grudge against the village, and it was so obvious. I'm sorry, but there's nothing about this I buy. So I wasn't too sad about them killing off this character because they already ruined him at this point, so killing him off was the next logical step. Plus, I was never that huge of a fan of him in the first place, but I was a bit surprised that the show went there because for the most part it seemed the show was scared of killing off any main characters. Wells doesn't count because he wasn't around long enough to be major. Anyway, then there's Jaha. I don't even know where to begin with this guy. Just that I thought it was kind of funny how when they thought Jaha had died saving them all, they named their camp Camp Jaha. But when they learned he was still alive and started acting like an asshole, they just very quietly and subtly behind the scenes changed the name of their camp to Arcadia. That actually amuses me. but not in a good way. That's actually really bad writing. So Jaha, when he gets down to the surface, he acts completely out of character and obsessed with this legend of the City of the Light rather than the safety of his society, which is how he's been established as behaving for years. I know the show tries to justify this by saying he had an epiphany and his near-death experience changed something in him, but I don't think it did a particularly good job at trying to convince me of that, because I do not buy it for an instant. On top of that, I absolutely totally hated the storyline about Jaha Murphy and a bunch of doomed red shirts going off on a quest to find the City of Light. First of all, what the City of Light is revealed to be is completely, totally, and utterly inconsistent with what has been established about it before. So first of all, the City of Light is first introduced as a myth or legend with scores of people set off on a barren wasteland to find it, but most believe it doesn't exist. And this is totally inconsistent with what it is actually revealed to be, which is a virtual reality created by an AI program, the very same one that was responsible for the nuclear holocaust in the first place. And the City of Light is what she used to brainwash people, who then in turn their sole mission in life is to get other people to join the City of Light, to the point where in season 3 they take over all of Grinder society and literally crucify those who refuse to join. So here's the thing: if anyone had heard of the City of Light in the first place, then they would have been brainwashed, and thus they would be seeking to brainwash other people, and this virus, if you will, that we saw in season 3 would have already spread by now, because some did claim to know the City of Light and to have been there, and if they did, they would have brainwashed others. Now, I know you could argue that it wasn't until Jaha brought down the nuclear reactor from the Ark that Ali was up to full strength, and that's why the virus hadn't spread before. Okay, but then why would anyone go to the City of Light in the first place? And plus, people were clearly talking about it like it was an actual place, not an artificial environment. But on top of all of that, the whole journey that Jaha Murphy and the soon-to-be-dead No Names was so cheesy. I absolutely could not stand it. It was so cliched. It did become ridiculous how much Jaha didn't care that he basically got everyone that followed him killed. And to be fair, this is a TV movie cliche that I see a lot, and I've always hated it, even in the aforementioned Star Trek with the red shirts. The reason why that became a shorthand is because it's ridiculous that a bunch of no-name characters who, you can so easily predict are going to die. I know that, they somewhat acknowledge Jaha's ruthless behavior by having Murphy point this out and be angry at him for it, and they try to justify it by him being obsessed. And bear in mind, this is before he got infected by the City of Light. So already they turned him from a wise, admired leader who was brutal when he had to be, but always for the greater good, who was admired, and they named the whole camp after him, to an insane, obsessed, non-feeling, moralist brute who doesn't even care that everyone except one guy who followed him got killed. And after a while, the way these red shirts died just got more and more ridiculous. So, yeah, even though I liked what they did with the storyline in Season 3, I absolutely hated it in Season 2. And I didn't even get to the whole thing about the Reapers, which is just an obvious ripoff of the Reavers from Firefly. Even the revelation of where they came from was similar, but I suppose that was more of a problem from season 1. At least in season 2 they got rid of them, so there's that. So now let me get into the ending of season 2, which, much like the show itself, I have a love-hate relationship with. Some things about the ending I absolutely loved, while others didn't quite add up. So it has a shocking, emotional, and powerful ending. There were some major plot holes in it. First of all, let's talk about the deal Mount Weather made with Alexa and the Grounders to free their people if they went away. This was a very obvious, contrived plot device in order to have Clark and the others be on their own and have to resort to extreme measures to win the day, which I don't buy for it instant. So let me be clear about this. I totally buy that Mount Weather would offer the Grounders this deal to weaken the Arcadia's forces. I don't for an instant buy that the Grounders would actually take this deal. Because as previously stated, the Grounders have been established as holding grudges really badly, even to the point of being highly irrational. They constantly find ways to be angry at Sky Crew and want to go to war with them, even when it makes no sense to do so, because they clearly can't let things go. And they have been established as hating the Mountain Men, as they call them, even more than they hate Sky Crew. After Mount Weather blew up, the site that they were at, in which they attempted to kill Alexa and Clark, Alexa made this huge speech that they would get their bloody revenge on the Mountain Men, for this no matter what. And before the war, she was like chanting, "Blood must have blood, blood must have blood," and they're all like, "You're kill the Mountain Men!" Ah! Now, I don't buy for a single solitary goddamn second that all of this, all it would take for the Mountain Men to be like, "Hey, we'll release your prisoners if you go away." Sure, some more reasonable or politically minded people might take such a deal, but the Grounders have very well been established as the type to go, "Fuck you, we're going to kill you and take our people back by force." In other words, the Grounders would be much more likely to care a lot more about getting revenge on the Mountain Men more than getting their people back alive. If the prisoners died in the process, oh well, casualties of war, killing the Mountain Men, which by the way wouldn't be just about getting revenge, but also ensuring that they would never harm them again, would be far, 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 far more important to them than getting back their prisoners alive. In fact, having the Grounders back down here shows them being far more forgiving and reasonable with the Mountain Men than they've ever been with Sky Crew, which makes no sense. As I said, they've been clearly established as hating the Mountain Men more, so yes, this is a very painfully obvious plot device to lead to what they wanted to do next. Now, getting to Clark's decision to kill everyone at Mount Weathers, to kill all of Mount Weathers' people, even those that helped them, this was a very devastating decision that would shape the course of a lot of characters, and it was great television. But I had a few issues with how it was executed. First of all, I didn't quite buy that Wallace would change his mind so easily to not wanting to help them, regardless of what excuse the show tried to give. Secondly, Cage's reaction to Clark having the ability to kill all of his people instantly with radiation, it didn't really make any sense. Okay, so first he was banking on her not having it in her to kill everyone, even those who helped them, and he chose to send a bunch of his people, a group of, an assault team to, get control of the control panel instead to, kill Clark and save the day. Okay, fine. That makes sense. But what doesn't make sense is he decides to escalate killing her people, and in fact chooses to antagonize Clark more by having her mother be the very next person to be killed. This makes no sense. I mean, some people might say, well, Clark killed her father, so he wants to kill her mother in revenge. No. Bullshit. It makes no sense, because it's almost like he wanted to force Clark's hand. I mean, he should have realized doing this, I'm going to kill your mother. He's just forcing her hand. He is forcing her to kill everyone. I don't care how much he thinks she doesn't have it in her. It doesn't matter. That's forcing her hand. He's making her do it. The smarter thing to do would be to placate her and act like he's cooperating. Stop killing the people, and to give his team time to go in and oust her before she has a chance to kill anyone. But instead he does the exact opposite and antagonizes her more. Like a giant moron, he's shocked when she irradiates the compound. Of course she did! You gave her no choice! Regardless of whether or not he thinks, that she didn't have it in her, the simple fact that she has the ability should have given him enough pause, and he should have tried other tactics. Also, even if you say, well, Cage is a moron, which I don't buy, by the way. I don't think anyone is that big of a moron, but even if you say that he is, well, let's look at it from Clark's perspective. Cage is going forward even knowing that she has the ability to kill them because he doesn't believe she'll use it. Why not actually just warn him or give him a small demonstration that she will, like begin to irradiate the compound slowly to give him a chance to back down, or maybe just irradiate a few sections in order to force his hand, make him see that he has no alternative but to give up, and let him know that if they try to attack her in the control room, that she'll kill them instantly. If she did that, Cage would have no choice but to surrender, as those under him wouldn't follow him, and even if he gave this order, because they would all know it would lead to their instant and total death. So I actually think Jasper was justified in hating Clark, because she didn't need to kill everyone, including those that helped them, at great risk to themselves, by the way, because she could have actually went about this a different way. But anyway, it didn't stop this ending from being exciting and gratifying, but it did prevent it from being flawless. So my rating for Season 2 out of 10 is an 8, extremely good. For the most part, a huge improvement on Season 1, as it presents a much more dynamic and original story with stronger characters, but it also has many flaws by being even more inconsistent with some character stories and having a totally useless storyline with Jaha finding the City of Light, and a spectacular ending that unfortunately is littered with plot holes. So finally, let me get into Season 3. Now, Season 3 is probably the season I had the biggest love-hate relationship with. As I was watching Season 3, I kept going back and forth from the season is awesome to the season totally sucks. It did seem like sometimes they purposely introduce setbacks or new conflicts to overcome in order to keep the season going. So I wasn't a huge fan on how the season got started. The whole thing with Clark being out on her soul quest or whatever it was felt really fake, and I didn't buy it. And the whole thing with her becoming this legendary figure of One Hitta and there being a bounty on her was really boring. And even though it made sense for her character or for his character, I wasn't really interested in Jasper's depression. It was a bit boring as well. So Kane and Abby start to fall in love to the point by the start of Season 4 they're actually sleeping together. Okay, out of all the offenses the show has made in drastic, unrealistic, and ridiculous character changes, this is by far the worst. He tried to kill her! Not only that, but he did kill her husband. She told Clark that she would never intended for her husband to die when she ratted him out, but it was Kane who insisted that he died. And then at the start of the season, he wanted to have her killed for trying to save Jaha's life and to prevent her from saving his life so that he could become Chancellor in order to kill a bunch of people, which Abby was violently opposed to. And I'm supposed to believe that they're falling in love? Get the fuck out of here. No way in hell. This is some of the dumbest shit I've ever seen. This show has actually lost all credibility when it comes to consistency. But the introduction of Pike and his farming station was an interesting one, as they landed in Ice Nation, which was a clan that was much more hostile towards the Sky People, and so they had a harder time of it, and thus it grew a different demeanor on ways of dealing with the Grinders. And I gotta be honest, at first I wasn't a fan of the fact that he managed to win the election and made up of mostly of people from Arcadia who should know better, and that most were okay with attacking the very Grinders sent there to protect them, which was in fact the single dumbest thing that they could possibly do, and that they bought Pike's rhetoric about them being able to take care of themselves and beat any Grinders that came after them. I hate this, that was so unbelievable, but I hate to say it because I try avoiding talking about politics in my videos, but after seeing the current state of affairs in the US government, it's hard for me to call this storyline unrealistic. In fact, it has been proven painfully realistic that people are willing to throw all reason out the door and let their prejudice run wild when they're overcome by fear. But I do have to say it was quite dumb of Abby and Kane in the first place, and all of this could, be said to be their fault because they kept trading off who was Chancellor, and they couldn't decide, no, you're Chancellor, I'm Chancellor, you're Chancellor, I'm Chancellor. It was really dumb. They're finally like, oh, well, let's have an election, decide which one of us is Chancellor, which opened the door for this asshole to come and take over. So their dumbassery could be allowed this to happen in the first place. And although I do buy Pike as a character, in fact I would say he's a very well presented character and realistic and dynamic, I didn't buy Bellamy's support for him. This again is yet another example of the show unrealistically changing someone's character to suit the plot. So at the start of season 3 they created a girlfriend for Bellamy so that they could promptly kill her off to give Bellamy a reason to hate the Grounders. I can't remember her name again. What was it? Plot Device? Well, she might as well have been called Plot Device because that's all she was, so that's what I'm going to call her from now on. Anyway, I could get why Bellamy might support Pike after Plot Device's death, but he takes it to an extreme that I don't buy at all. Like attacking and killing innocent Grounders who were there to help them, and then helping Pike round up his friends, and just being totally unreasonable, and that was ridiculous, especially when Clark tried to talk sense to him. He was like, no, I believe in Pike. Plot Device death or no, this is ridiculous. Like, I get he might be upset over Plot Device's death and hold some unreasonable rage towards the Grounders, but taking it to this extreme is simply out of character for him. And yes, I know they did make Bellamy change his mind eventually and go back to the way he should have been behaving the whole time, but does not at all excuse this unrealistic character change. So now, let me talk about Charles Vane. Rowan, the Exile Ice Nation prince who becomes king after the queen dies, but before that was a bounty hunter hoping to cash in on Clark's infamy. I have mixed feelings about the storyline. While I really liked this actor and I thought he worked well in this role, although I am never going to be able to think of him as anyone other than Charles Vane from Black Sails, because he was so good in that role. And honestly, this Rowan guy just seems like an obvious attempt to copy that character, and he has the same sort of friend/foe feeling that Vane did. At times I liked his role and the element he added to the show as a possible ally to Clark, but an uneasy one, and at other times he was all too obvious what the show was trying to do with this character, and his involvement could be a bit contrived. And overall I think I liked him. However, I really didn't care that much for the inner conflict between Ice Nation and, Sky Crew or whatever. I thought they went back and forth on this a bit too much. But now let me get into the whole Alley City of Light storyline. As I already mentioned, I thought the way the storyline was handled and introduced in Season 2 was stupid beyond belief, but I liked what they did with it this season. In fact, I liked the show a lot more once it kicked in. It was interesting that it sort of just interjected itself in this already complex situation where Pike was trying his damnedest to start a war with the Grounders while Clark was trying to stop them from killing all of her people because of this asshole. But then Allie came along and really did give them a common enemy because she didn't discriminate, and I loved the slow build to this at first, as it was just Jaha with a few wacko followers, and then eventually it led to them taking over all of Arcadia, and then eventually they took over the Grounder capital as well. And eventually this led to a season finale where there were only a handful of people not under Allie's control, and she had like her minions climbing tall buildings in order to get to them. That was really effectively creepy. And the episode that showed the flashback of how all this came to be with the AI, killing off the human race, and how the scientists tried to create a replacement AI to make things better, but people's fears got the better of them, and they wouldn't let her complete it. And if she had, she could have actually stopped the apocalypse in the first place. This also reveals what happened to this unknown 13th station that was destroyed, that was mentioned on the show before. And it was, this new AI and her that started the Grounder Society in the first place and led to the Commander. And as much as I love the storyline, it doesn't connect with what has already been established. As Alexa wasn't even the leader of the Grounders in season 2. She was the apprentice. It was that other chick who died trying to escape Mount Weather with Clark, who was the leader, and there was no chance for her to pass the flame to Alexa. So again, the storyline fails to match up consistently, but it's still a really good one, and I like the dynamic it added to everything, as only children with a certain blood are allowed to carry the flame. Although, again, I have to say the whole thing with that Ice Nation princess killing, all the other candidates and the other grinders being perfectly okay with this is total bullshit. She totally cheated, and she should be executed and the Ice Nation expelled for doing so. Fire, blood, or no, I don't care. But anyway, the show has to find some way to keep the plot going. Anyway, we got a few deaths this season. Alexa died because the actress wanted to do Fear the Walking Dead, and Lincoln died because that actor wanted to do American Gods show, and Rowan died because that actor wanted to do Black Sails. But then he was brought back to life in season 4 after he was no longer in Black Sails. Anywho, I did love the way they handled Lincoln's death, as I totally bought it and I thought it really worked. I loved the effect it had on Octavia, as I loved that ending where Pike saved her life and they worked together to defeat Allie, and he held his hand out in friendship and she was just like, "Fuck you, sucker!" and killed him. That was actually awesome. And I can't say I blamed her as, that's Lincoln you killed, you son of a bitch. You think you can get away with that? Pfft. And the death of Alexa kind of sucked because she was such a great character, but I loved the ending episode where she came back in the City of Light because Clark put the flame in her, and that was actually quite touching, seeing the two of them team up again to take Allie down. I must say, a few tears were shed. As for the ending, when Allie revealed that a nuclear holocaust was coming and without her the human race would die, that was an interesting dynamic and did set up a nice little dilemma for the next season. But when Clark was there hovering over the kill switch and taking her sweet time to push the button while everyone outside faced imminent death, I got really annoyed and was like, "Oh, come on, just push the goddamn button already, jeez." But all in all, I will say it was an effective finale. So my rating for season 3 out of 10 is a 7, very good. 1 second the season is awesome, the next second it sucked, and back and forth. But overall, I'd say this was a decent season, and a number of great and suspenseful moments were enough to outweigh the bad. But still, I can't forget about those flaws altogether now. So my hope for season 4 going forward is that they take a page from season 2 and 3 and introduce another adversary and not just go back and forth with the potential Gronder conflict, because they already played out this storyline to death. And I really think this needs to be the final season of this show. The worst thing that could happen, in my view, is at the end of the season they find some contrived way to keep this story going. I think that it's pretty much run its course, and at the end of the season, I think they should just call it quits. But we'll see. So that's it for my review of the 100 seasons 1 through 3. I will be reviewing the on episode of the 100 season 4 every once in a while, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. Also check out my channel for many more videos on shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Black Sails, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.